My parents stood on my front porch, holding a legal non-disclosure agreement worth $300,000, begging me to save my brother from going to prison, completely unaware that the man standing directly behind me, holding the federal financial logs they spent 15 years trying to bury, was the exact same roommate my brother had ruined to cover up his first major crime. The look on my mother's face when she realized who was holding my hand did not just freeze her solid, it made 30 years of family lies collapse right there on my doormat. My name is Julian Vance, and I was 16 when I finally understood that my life was nothing more than an emergency fund for my older brother Damon. Whenever Damon tripped, my parents broke my legs to give him a crutch. They did it so often and with such casual cruelty that it became the defining rhythm of our household. Before I lay out the exact mechanics of how we dismantled their multi-million-dollar empire of fake redemption, and why my brother is currently waiting for a federal indictment, tell me what time it is where you are watching this, where you are located, and what the weather is like outside. I want to see exactly how far the truth travels when it finally gets out of the house. Damon was 21 when the final hammer fell, and he was already an absolute master at transforming his personal greed into a family crisis that required my immediate sacrifice. My mother, Eleanor, called him a free spirit who just needed room to breathe. My father, Arthur, called him a natural-born leader who was destined for greatness. I called him a parasite who knew exactly which veins to tap. Damon's emergencies always had an incredible sense of timing. They had a habit of arriving the exact second the spotlight threatened to drift toward me. On my 13th birthday, I had earned a spot in the regional science finals. 10 minutes before we were supposed to leave for the ceremony, Damon stumbled through the front door, claiming a group of older boys had targeted him at the park, alleging they had taken his expensive watch and threatened his life. My parents abandoned my awards ceremony to spend 6 hours at the local police station filing reports for a watch Damon had actually sold to buy imported sneakers. On my 14th birthday, I had saved enough money from mowing lawns to buy a professional drafting table. I wanted to be an architect. The day the table was delivered, Damon took my father's luxury sedan without permission and wrapped it around a concrete light pole 3 blocks away. He swore on his life that a wild dog had jumped into the road and forced him to swerve. My parents did not even let me unwrap the drafting table. They spent the next 4 days dealing with insurance adjusters, paying off city property damage fees, and comforting Damon because the airbag deployment had scratched his chin. The table sat in the garage, covered in dust, until I eventually sold it to buy a bus ticket. On my 15th birthday, my maternal grandmother, Maeve, had arranged a small family dinner at a quiet steakhouse downtown. It was the only time she was allowed to celebrate with us, as she openly detested how my parents treated me. We were 10 minutes into the drive when Damon called my mother's phone, hyperventilating. He claimed he had accidentally ingested peanut oil at a friend's house, and his throat was closing up. My father pulled a hard U-turn on the highway, nearly causing a pileup, and sped toward the emergency room. When we arrived, Damon was sitting in the waiting area, drinking a carbonated soda and laughing with a nurse. He had a mild skin rash that could have been treated with an over-the-counter pill, but my parents insisted on staying at the clinic until midnight, leaving my grandmother sitting alone at the restaurant. By the time I turned 16, I did not bother hoping for a normal birthday. I simply waited to see what kind of disaster Damon would manufacture to erase me. That year, Damon was the student treasurer of the Green Future Campus Coalition, a prestigious regional environmental cleanup fund at his university. He had access to the main donation accounts, which held over $120,000 in community contributions. When the University Audit Committee announced a routine quarterly review, Damon panicked. He had spent months funneling money out of the coalition's accounts into a high-leverage offshore cryptocurrency trading platform, fully convinced he would strike it rich and replace the funds before anyone noticed. Instead, the market took a massive dive, and he lost every single dollar. Rather than admitting what he had done, Damon spent 48 hours creating a digital paper trail that pointed directly to his roommate, Tristan Cole. Tristan was a brilliant, quiet student from a working-class family who had climbed his way into the university on a full academic scholarship. He was the first person in his family to attend college, and he worked 20 hours a week in the campus cafeteria just to afford his textbooks. My parents did not ask a single hard question. The moment Damon told them that Tristan had stolen his administrative login codes, transferred the funds to a private wallet, and planted incriminating files on Damon's laptop, they mobilized. They did not care that the digital transfers had been initiated from an IP address mapped directly to our family's summer cabin, where Damon had stayed the previous weekend. They only cared that their golden boy was facing expulsion, a permanent criminal record, and public ruin. The night before my 16th birthday, I woke up at 2 a.m. to get a glass of water. As I passed my father's study, I saw the glow of his computer screen and heard my parents speaking in low, urgent tones. Arthur was reading a letter he had just drafted to the university's board of trustees. He was a senior partner at a corporate defense firm, and he knew exactly how to weaponize legal language to create doubt. The letter accused Tristan of malicious electronic sabotage, identity theft, and financial fraud. Arthur claimed our family possessed technical evidence proving Tristan's guilt, even though my father could barely configure his own home router. Attached to the email draft were several screenshots Damon had fabricated, showing fake chat logs where Tristan supposedly joked about how easy it was to manipulate the coalition's primitive software. But the final attachment was the one that made my chest tighten so hard I could barely breathe. It was an email Damon had sent my father from his personal, unverified account 2 days prior. In that email, Damon wrote, "I just need you to tie the university board up in legal nonsense long enough for me to borrow against my future trust. Once the market bounces back next month, I can buy back the crypto, transfer the $120,000 back into the green fund, and no one will ever know. We just have to make them suspect Tristan until the semester ends." My father's reply, sent 5 minutes later, was short. "Delete this email immediately. We will handle the strategy over the phone. Do not put anything else in writing." My brother had stolen charity money, lost it in a gambling spiral, and was actively planning to destroy an innocent student's entire life to buy himself time. And my parents were not just helping him hide. They were actively drafting the shovel to bury Tristan Cole. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. I walked quietly back to my bedroom, grabbed a high-capacity flash drive from my desk, and went down to the family room computer. Our household used a shared network folder for family taxes and savings accounts. I logged in, copied the entire email chain, the drafted letter, the fraudulent screenshots, and the metadata files. While the transfer bar loaded, I decided to check the status of my own savings account. My grandfather Marcus, a retired Navy veteran who had always been my protector, had established a trust fund for my education when I was born. The last time I had checked the statements, it held $95,000, money meant to pay for my architectural degree and give me a starting point in life. When the account screen loaded, my hands started to shake. The balance was $44. Over the previous 9 months, my parents had executed 12 separate withdrawals, draining $94,000 from my future. I clicked on the transfer receipts. Every dollar had been routed to a private criminal defense attorney my parents had hired to protect Damon during a prior, hushed-up incident involving a rental property fire, as well as several payments to a reputation management firm that specialized in deleting online arrest records. They had not just canceled my 16th birthday to save Damon. They had literally stolen my entire future, wiped out my grandfather's legacy, and left me with absolutely nothing, all so my brother would never have to face a single consequence for his actions. I did not cry. I did not scream. I stood there in the dark, watching the little blue light on my flash drive blink as it copied the evidence of their corruption. I went to my room, packed a single duffel bag with my clothes, my high school transcripts, and the cash I had saved from my weekend library job, which amounted to exactly $480. I wrote a note, placed it on the kitchen island, and walked out of the house into the freezing pre-dawn air. The note said, "I found the files. I know where my college money went. Do not ever look for me." I took the first bus out of town, heading 300 miles north to the coastal city of Seattle, where my maternal grandmother, Maeve, lived. She was 81 years old, sharp as a razor, and had spent the last 20 years living in a quiet craftsman house overlooking the Sound. When she opened her door at 8 in the morning and saw my duffel bag, she did not gasp. She did not ask stupid questions. She looked at my face, stepped aside, and said, "Which one of them did it?" "Both of them," I said, "and they did it for Damon." I plugged the flash drive into her laptop. Maeve sat in her armchair, her reading glasses perched on her nose, and went through every single document. She did not look away once. When she finished reading Damon's email about framing Tristan, she closed the laptop, walked over to her landline, and called her personal estate attorney. "We are going to file for immediate legal emancipation," she told me, her voice steady and cold. "And then we are going to make sure they can never touch another dime of your grandfather's legacy." My parents' reaction to my escape came by noon. They did not call the police to report a missing 16-year-old. Instead, my mother sent a barrage of frantic text messages to my grandmother's phone. They did not ask if I was warm, if I had eaten, or if I was safe. Eleanor wrote, "Tell Julian to return the family drive immediately. He has stolen highly sensitive legal documents belonging to his father's firm. If those files are leaked, his father can be disbarred. This is a family matter, and he is acting out of pure, childish jealousy because we had to postpone his dinner." Maeve did not write back. She handed the phone to her attorney, who drafted a formal cease and desist letter. Within 48 hours, my parents were notified that any attempt to contact me, approach my new school, or enter my grandmother's property would be met with an immediate restraining order and a petition for a grand jury investigation into the unauthorized withdrawal of my trust funds. My parents backed off, but they immediately began building their own version of the narrative. They told our extended family, our neighbors, and my former school friends that I had suffered a severe mental breakdown. They claimed I was pathologically jealous of Damon's academic success, that I had stolen family funds myself, and that I had run away to escape the shame of my own academic failures. To the rest of the world, I was the unstable, resentful younger brother who had abandoned a loving family at their most vulnerable moment. Meanwhile, Tristan Cole's life was being systematically dismantled. Because my father had successfully created enough digital confusion and threatened the university with a massive multi-million-dollar lawsuit for administrative negligence, the board panicked. They suspended Tristan indefinitely while they conducted a prolonged internal investigation. He lost his on-campus housing, his cafeteria job, and his prestigious summer internship with an environmental engineering firm. Even though the local police refused to file criminal charges due to a lack of physical evidence, the damage was done. On campus, everyone treated Tristan like a thief who had managed to slip through a legal loophole. His parents, who had taken out a second mortgage to help him with his living expenses, had to spend their savings on a defense lawyer just to keep Tristan from being formally prosecuted. Damon, on the other hand, was allowed to quietly withdraw from the university for personal health reasons. My parents spun his departure as a courageous decision to step away from an institution that had failed to protect its students from rogue hackers like Tristan. They wrapped Damon in layers of maternal pity and financial comfort, setting him up in a luxury apartment in a different city so he could recover from the trauma of being falsely targeted. I spent my 17th and 18th years working 30 hours a week at my grandmother's independent bookstore, studying late into the night and learning how to look at the world through the cold, objective lens of financial data. I decided I would never let anyone write my story for me again. I enrolled in a state university, majoring in forensic accounting and minor in investigative journalism. I paid for every credit hour myself, working 2 jobs and living in a tiny, unheated basement apartment. My parents stopped making the court-ordered restitution payments to my grandmother's estate after just 4 months, claiming they had suffered severe financial hardship due to Damon's ongoing medical expenses. By the time I was 23, Damon had discovered a highly lucrative new career. He realized that in the modern world, public vulnerability is a commodity. He launched a personal development brand called the Vance Recovery Initiative. He wrote a self-published memoir titled The Crucible of Grace, Surviving False Accusations and Reclaiming Your Legacy. In the book, he detailed his time at the university, painting himself as a brilliant student leader who had been betrayed by a bitter, envious roommate and a deeply unstable younger brother who had run away from home to join a radical lifestyle. He didn't just tell the lie, he monetized it. He began booking high-paying speaking engagements at regional business conferences, churches, and private universities, lecturing on how families can survive the shame of a child's betrayal. My parents were always in the front row. Eleanor became the chief operating officer of his non-profit foundation, and Arthur acted as the general counsel. They used our old childhood holiday photos in their promotional slideshows, with my face blurred out under a caption that read, "Healing the empty seat at the table." Damon was earning over $300,000 a year, telling thousands of people how my resentment had nearly broken his spirit. while the real victim of his crime, Tristan Cole, was living in a cramped apartment, working 12-hour shifts as a low-level bookkeeping assistant because his name was still poisoned by the old university search results. I decided it was time to find Tristan. It took me nearly 9 months to track him down. He had changed his phone number 5 times, deleted all his social media profiles, and lived under a variation of his middle name to avoid the online search results that linked him to the Green Future scandal. When I finally knocked on his door in a quiet suburb of Denver, he looked at me with immediate defensive suspicion. He was 30 years old, his shoulders tense, his eyes tired. "If you're here to get a quote for your brother's new documentary, get off my property," Tristan said, his voice flat and hard. "I'm not here for Damon," I said, holding up my hands. "My name is Julian Vance. I'm the 16-year-old brother who left the note, and I have the actual emails my father tried to delete." Tristan stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Slowly, his shoulders dropped. He opened the door and I walked into his living room. We sat at his kitchen table for 5 hours. I showed him the digital files I had kept secure for nearly 15 years. When Tristan read the email where Damon explicitly admitted to framing him while my father covered it up, his face went completely pale. He sat in silence, his fingers tracing the edge of his coffee mug, his breathing shallow. "They told my parents that if we didn't drop our administrative appeal, they would file a civil defamation suit that would bankrupt my family," Tristan whispered. "My dad was so terrified of losing our house that he made me sign a non-disclosure agreement. I spent 10 years believing I was just unlucky. I didn't know they had actual proof of my innocence on their home computer the entire time." "They did," I said, "and they used my college fund to pay the lawyers who threatened your father." That night, our partnership was born. We did not want a quick, messy internet call-out that Damon could easily spin as another unstable attack from his resentful brother. We wanted a clean, clinical, devastating execution of the truth. Over the next 4 years, Tristan and I worked side by side. He brought his forensic investigative skills to the table, and I brought my financial auditing experience. But as we dug deeper into Damon's foundation, we discovered something much larger than a 15-year-old college scandal. The Vance Recovery Initiative had grown into a massive national nonprofit, raising over $4 million annually from wealthy donors who wanted to support family reconciliation programs. But when we audited their public tax filings and cross-referenced them with corporate registration databases, we found a massive web of suspicious financial routing. Damon's foundation was paying over $500,000 a year in consulting fees to a shell company registered in Delaware under my mother's maiden name. The foundation had also purchased over 80,000 copies of Damon's self-published book, routing the purchases through private distributors to artificially inflate his sales numbers and place him on regional bestseller lists, then distributing those same books to donors as educational materials, paid for by their own tax-deductible contributions. Even worse, we discovered that the foundation was paying for my parents' luxury sedan leases, their summer cabin property taxes, and Damon's high-end downtown penthouse, all under the guise of regional outreach centers and wellness retreats. They had turned their family lie into a highly sophisticated financial machine that funded their luxury lifestyle, and they were using my face and Tristan's ruined reputation as the emotional fuel to keep the donor checks coming. "We don't just have a book," Tristan said to me one evening as we sat surrounded by stacks of financial ledgers in our home office. "We have a federal tax fraud case." By then, Tristan and I had built a deep, unshakable life together. We had spent 4 years sharing a small apartment, cooking dinners, celebrating quiet birthdays, and healing from the same family-inflicted wounds. When I looked at him, I didn't see the broken kid who had been kicked out of his university dorm. I saw a brilliant, resilient man who had helped me reclaim my own worth. We got married in a quiet, civil ceremony in Seattle. The only guest was my grandmother Maeve, who held our hands and told us we were the only real family she had left. 2 months after our wedding, Damon announced his foundation's largest fundraising campaign yet, the Empty Seat Gala. It was scheduled to take place at the downtown Seattle Convention Center, a high-profile event with tickets costing $1,000 per plate. The promotional materials featured an elegant, empty wooden chair illuminated by a single spotlight, with a voiceover from Damon describing how he still prayed every night for his lost, unstable younger brother to return to the family fold. "He wants to use you to raise another $1 million, Tristan said, looking at the promotional video on his laptop. "Let him raise it," I replied, a cold smile forming on my face, "because we are going to be in the room next door." I had spent the last 3 years writing a meticulously detailed nonfiction manuscript titled The Emergency He Invented: How a Family Built an Empire on a Lie. My publisher had kept the project under strict embargo. We had secured a venue in the exact same convention center, in the hall directly adjacent to Damon's gala, for our book launch and press conference, scheduled for the exact same evening. We had sent advance copies of the book, along with complete digital drives containing the original email chains, the technical server metadata, and the Foundation's audited tax records, to the Federal Internal Revenue Service, the State Attorney General's office, and every major investigative reporter in the Pacific Northwest. The trap was completely set. Then, 3 days before the gala, my parents discovered what was about to happen. A journalist they had tried to pitch a reconciliation exclusive to had called my father's firm for a comment on our upcoming book release. Which brings us back to my front porch. The doorbell had rung at exactly 8:45 in the morning. When I opened the door, Eleanor was wearing her classic, media-ready expression of heavy, grandmotherly sorrow. Arthur was dressed in his custom-tailored litigation suit, holding a thick leather portfolio. They looked exactly like they did when they were preparing to tell me that my birthday dinner was canceled. "Julian," my mother whispered, her voice trembling with theatrical emotion. "Thank God you're home. We've been looking for you for so long." "You've had my address for 7 years, Eleanor," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "My grandmother's estate attorney sent it to you when we finalized the trust fund lawsuit. Let's not play the reunion game." My father stepped forward, his corporate tone immediately taking over. "Julian, we are here as a family. We know you are angry. We know you feel left out of the Foundation's success. But this book you are planning to release is a highly destructive, inaccurate piece of fiction that will destroy innocent lives. We are prepared to make things right." He opened the leather folder, revealing a $300,000 settlement agreement and a check drawn from his firm's private account. "This is a complete restoration of your grandfather's trust, with 15 years of compounded interest," Arthur said, pointing to the figures, "along with a formal apology from the family to be kept private between us. In exchange, you will withdraw the book from publication, sign a standard non-disclosure agreement regarding our family's private financial history, and release a joint statement with Damon saying you have reconciled." I looked down at the paper. It was a beautiful, clean transaction. They were offering to pay me back the money they had stolen from me 15 years ago, using the money they had stolen from their donors today, just to buy my silence. "And what about Tristan Cole?" I asked, looking my father directly in the eyes. My mother made a soft, dismissive sound. "Julian, that was a lifetime ago. Tristan has moved on. He's fine. We cannot let a decades-old campus misunderstanding destroy a charity that helps thousands of broken families every single year." "He isn't fine," a voice said from behind me. Tristan stepped out of the shadow of our hallway and stood right next to me, his arm resting gently against mine. My mother's jaw dropped. She took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes darted from Tristan to me, her face losing every single trace of its carefully rehearsed sorrow. My father tightened his grip on the leather folder so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked at Tristan, then at me, his legal mind frantically trying to calculate the mathematical probability of this specific nightmare occurring. What is he doing here?" Eleanor stammered. "He lives here," I said. "Tristan is my husband. We've been married for 2 years, and we've spent every single day of those 2 years compiling the federal tax records of your foundation." For nearly 10 seconds, the only sound on my porch was the rustling of the pine trees in the yard. My parents looked like they had been hit by a physical wall of concrete. The two people they had used as disposable currency to fund Damon's golden life were now standing on the same porch, united, holding the match that was about to burn their entire house down. "Julian," my father said, his voice dropping its corporate polish and taking on a sharp, dangerous edge. "You have no idea the kind of legal liability you are exposing yourself to. If you leak proprietary financial records, we will file a federal lawsuit against you before the sun sets today." "You can't," Tristan said, stepping forward. "We didn't leak them. We submitted them directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service 3 weeks ago under the federal whistleblower statute. As of 9 o'clock this morning, your foundation's main bank accounts have been placed under an administrative freeze pending a formal audit." My father's breath hitched. He looked at his phone, which had just started to vibrate in his jacket pocket. He did not answer it. "This is an ambush," Eleanor cried, her eyes filling with real, unscripted tears of panic. "Julian, how can you do this to your own brother? He is your blood. He is fragile. If you do this, you will kill him." "Damon isn't fragile, Mom," I said, using the word for the first time in 15 years. "He's a thief, and you've been his accomplices for a decade. Now, I suggest you go get some coffee, because you have a very long evening ahead of you." I closed the front door, locked it, and leaned my back against the wood. Tristan wrapped his arms around my neck, resting his forehead against mine. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. "I've been ready since I was 16, I said. That evening, the Seattle Convention Center was a study in absolute psychological warfare. In Hall A, the Vance Recovery Initiative had set up their grand ballroom. The tables were covered in white linen, the ice sculptures were dripping under the expensive stage lights, and 300 of the city's wealthiest donors were sipping champagne, waiting for Damon to deliver his keynote address on the power of restorative grace. In Hall B, separated by a thick, insulated acoustic partition wall, my publisher had set up a massive press conference. We had 40 chairs set up for local journalists, national news outlets, and independent financial reporters. On the stage sat a simple wooden table, with 2 microphones, a stack of my books, and a large digital projector screen. At 6 o'clock, our event began. I walked onto the stage with Tristan beside me. The room was packed to the doors. The rumor of our book's release and the simultaneous IRS investigation had leaked to the press just 2 hours prior, and the media was practically clawing at the walls for details. I adjusted my microphone, looked out at the cameras, and began to read from the first chapter of my book. "My parents spent my childhood teaching me that my survival was negotiable," I read, my voice steady, carrying through the high-quality sound system. "They taught me that if my older brother wanted to burn the house down, it was my job to sit in the ashes and pretend we were having a campfire." On my 16th birthday, they drained my grandfather's college trust to buy my brother's way out of a financial crime, and they framed an innocent classmate named Tristan Cole to keep my brother's name clean. Tonight, we are going to look at the receipts. I clicked the remote control. The digital projector behind me lit up, displaying a massive, high-definition image of the original email my father had tried to delete. "I just need you to tie the university board up in legal nonsense long enough for me to borrow against my future trust. Just blame Tristan's IP address." The room went dead silent. The clicking of camera shutters was the only sound in the massive hall. Then, Tristan took the microphone. He did not speak with anger. He spoke with the cold, clinical precision of a professional forensic accountant. He walked the reporters through the server logs that proved Damon had initiated the fraudulent transactions from the family cabin. He showed the forged chat logs, pointing out the technical inconsistencies that my father's legal team had successfully hidden from the university board 15 years ago. But we didn't stop at the past. Tristan clicked to the next slide, displaying the internal tax records of the Vance Recovery Initiative from the previous fiscal year. "Over the last 3 years," Tristan explained, "this foundation has raised $12 million in public donations. According to their federal tax filings, 80% of those funds are listed as educational outreach and community healing programs. However, our independent audit of their corporate accounts shows that over $2 million of that money was directly routed to a shell company owned by Eleanor Vance, which then paid for the lease on a private luxury yacht, 3 separate European vacations for Damon Vance, and the purchase of 84,000 copies of his own book to artificially manipulate bestseller lists." The journalists in the room were frantically typing on their laptops. Some of them were already on their phones, calling their editors to rewrite their front-page stories. While we were speaking, the acoustic partition wall separating our hall from the grand ballroom began to hum. On the other side, Damon had just walked onto the stage to deliver his keynote speech. But his audience was no longer paying attention to him. The live feed of our press conference was being broadcast across multiple local news channels and shared on every social media platform. In the grand ballroom next door, donors began looking down at their phones. Whispers started to ripple across the expensive tables. Board members of the foundation were staring at the screen, watching their own signatures on tax documents being projected in high definition in the room right next door. Within 20 minutes, the crowd in the grand ballroom began to disintegrate. People were quietly leaving their tables, heading for the exits, and refusing to make their planned pledges. Suddenly, the side doors of Hall B burst open. Damon led the way, his face red, his expensive designer suit disheveled, his eyes wild with absolute fury. Behind him came Eleanor and Arthur, followed by two of the Foundation's private security guards and a small crowd of curious donors who had followed them from the ballroom. Damon marched toward the stage, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This is a pathetic, desperate lie," Damon screamed, his voice cracking through the quiet hall. "Julian is an unstable, resentful child who has spent 15 years trying to destroy this family because he couldn't handle his own failures. He is using a falsified, edited email to settle a childhood grudge." I didn't call for security. I didn't step back from the microphone. I looked at my brother, the man who had spent his entire life playing the victim, and I felt absolutely nothing but a deep, cold clarity. "I'm glad you're here, Damon," I said quietly into the microphone, because we were just about to play the audio. Tristan clicked the remote. A recording began to play over the hall's massive speakers. It was not a digital file from 15 years ago. It was a voice recording my grandmother Maeve had made on her home landline when my father had called her 3 years prior, attempting to pressure her into changing her will to exclude me. My father's voice, clear and unedited, boomed through the room. "Maeve, you need to understand something. Julian has always been a liability. He has files that could destroy Damon's career and put him in federal prison. If you don't help us secure those files from him, we will use our legal resources to tie your estate up in probate court until there is nothing left for him to inherit anyway. We will make sure he gets absolutely nothing." Arthur stood near the back of the room, his face turning a dark, sickly shade of gray. He closed his eyes, his head dropping as he realized his own voice had just sealed his professional and personal ruin in front of 20 television cameras. My mother looked around the room, searching for a friendly face, a sympathetic donor, or a camera she could smile at to spin the disaster. But she found nothing. The donors who had followed them were backing away, their expressions filled with disgust and disbelief. "Damon," I said, looking down at my brother from the stage. "Your foundation spent $3 million on the empty seat campaign, telling the world that you were waiting for your lost brother to come home. Well, I'm home, and I brought the bill." Damon tried to speak, to yell, to shout some other manufactured emergency to save himself. But his voice was drowned out by the sudden, chaotic rush of reporters running toward him, their microphones thrust into his face, their questions hitting him like a hail of stones. "Mr. Vance, did you use donor funds to buy your own books? Mr. Vance, is the IRS currently auditing your accounts? Arthur, did you threaten to bankrupt your own mother-in-law to hide your son's financial fraud?" Damon turned and fled back through the side doors, his security guards struggling to keep the press from following him. My mother sat down in one of the empty chairs near the exit, her head in her hands, weeping with the quiet, desperate realization that the family image she had spent 30 years manufacturing had just been erased in a matter of minutes. The legal and financial fallout was swift, relentless, and completely devastating. The State Attorney General's office launched a formal investigation into the Vance Recovery Initiative the very next morning. Within 3 months, the foundation's nonprofit status was officially revoked, and its remaining assets were placed under a court-ordered receivership to be distributed back to the defrauded donors. Arthur's law firm terminated his partnership before the week was over, citing a flagrant violation of professional ethics and the clear evidence of extorting family members. His license to practice law was suspended, and he spent the next 2 years of his life dealing with a series of civil lawsuits from former clients who wanted their financial records reviewed. My mother, Eleanor, was forced to resign from all her charity boards. The high society friends who had spent years praising her maternal devotion stopped returning her calls, deleting her from their social calendars as though she had never existed. Damon did not go to prison. His lawyers managed to secure a plea agreement that involved a massive $500,000 fine, the permanent forfeiture of his book's royalties, and a lifetime ban from operating or serving on the board of any charitable organization in the United States. But for Damon, losing his freedom would have been a mercy compared to what he actually lost. He lost his stage. He lost his audience. He lost his ability to walk into a room and have people look at him with admiration and pity. His name became a national synonym for financial fraud and familial betrayal. When people searched his name online, they did not find his best-selling memoir. They found the high-definition video of him screaming at his younger brother while his father's extortive phone calls played in the background. My parents were forced to sell our childhood home, the place where my birthdays had been canceled, to pay off their legal fees and the compounding restitution debts they owed to Tristan's family. The house was purchased by a young couple with 3 small children, who immediately tore down the old wooden fence and painted the dark, heavy rooms with bright, warm colors. They moved into a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city, living on Arthur's diminished retirement pension and the small remaining trust my grandmother had left behind after her passing. A year after the book launch, I received a package in the mail. It was a simple cardboard box with no return address. Inside was my grandfather Marcus's old Navy uniform compass, along with a cashier's check for $95,000, the exact amount my parents had stolen from my college trust, paid back with 15 years of compounded interest. Attached to the compass was a short note written in my mother's neat, elegant handwriting. Julian, we are sorry we taught you that your happiness was something we could negotiate. We were wrong. We spent 30 years trying to save a son who did not want to be saved, and we lost the only son who actually possessed the strength to build a real life. We do not expect you to forgive us, but we want you to know that the debt has been paid. I looked at the check, then at the old compass. I felt no rush of triumphant joy. I felt no lingering anger. I simply felt the quiet, profound weight of a circle finally closing. I transferred the entire $95,000 into a private foundation that Tristan and I had established in my grandmother Maeve's honor. The fund provides full academic scholarships and legal defense assistance to working-class students who have been falsely accused of misconduct by their academic institutions. We don't require the applicants to tell their stories to the media. We don't ask them to write books about their trauma. We just give them their futures back, with no strings attached. Last week, I celebrated my 32nd birthday. Tristan and I did not go to an expensive steakhouse or throw a massive party. We spent the evening in our quiet house, cooking a simple dinner, listening to the rain tap against the window, and playing with our 2 rescue dogs. At 8 o'clock, Tristan walked into the living room holding a small chocolate cake with a single candle burning in the center. "Happy birthday, Julian," he said, setting the cake down on the coffee table. I looked at the small, warm flame. I looked at the man sitting beside me, the man who had helped me turn my family's worst secrets into a fortress of absolute truth. "Are you going to make a wish?" Tristan asked, his eyes crinkling with a quiet, knowing smile. "I don't need to," I said, blowing out the candle. "For the first time in my life, there isn't a single emergency left to solve." For everyone who stayed with us until the very end of this story, we want to say a sincere thank you. The characters and details in this narrative have been carefully designed for dramatic reflection and entertainment, but the core truth it carries is entirely real. A quiet life after years of family chaos can feel strange at first. It can feel too soft, too empty, or too still, but that does not mean it is broken. Sometimes, peace is just the sound of people who loved you only when you were useful, finally losing their voice. Let us know in the comments if you have ever had to walk away from a family that expected you to carry their weight, and how you built your own home after the storm. We read every single one of your messages. Take care of yourselves, keep the truth close, and we will see you in the next story.